On a quiet winter afternoon, a police officer thought he was just stopping for coffee by a frozen lake. Then his canine froze, listening to something the wind carried but humans could not. A little girl stood alone near the ice, barely speaking, walking as if every step hurt. She begged them not to make her remove her shoe. Instinct said, "Help her." Reason said, "Wait." But some pain isn't meant to be ignored, and some secrets are hidden where only love will look. What they uncovered wasn't just a clue, it was a promise buried in fear and faith. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe for stories that restore hope. Winter daylight lay pale and fragile over the half-frozen lake. Wind threading through empty wooden tables of a lakeside outdoor restaurant, carrying the quiet ache of cold and waiting. Matthew Carter had learned to recognize silence that wasn't peaceful. This one wasn't. It pressed against his shoulders as he sat near the railing. Uniform jacket zipped to the collar, black gloves folded beside a steaming paper cup. At 35, Matthew had the kind of face people trusted without knowing why. A square jaw softened by faint stubble, steady blue eyes set beneath brows that rarely frowned but never drifted. Years on the force had carved calm into him, not hardness. He spoke gently even to the worst nights, a habit shaped by a past he rarely mentioned. A childhood spent learning how easily raised voices could turn into bruises. He believed in quiet now, in staying low, in listening before acting. Beside him sat his canine partner, Rex, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a thick sable coat and amber eyes sharp as cut glass. Rex was disciplined, trained, obedient, but Matthew knew the difference between commands and instinct. When Rex rested, his body truly rested. When something was wrong, every muscle told the truth before sound ever did. The restaurant was nearly empty. A woman inside wiped counters with slow, bored movements. A pair of tourists stood near the dock, taking photos of the lake, unaware of how thin the ice was this early in winter. Matthew took a sip of coffee and exhaled, letting himself believe, just for a minute, that this pause belonged to him. Rex lifted his head. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough. Matthew noticed the change at once. The dog's ears rose, angling toward the shoreline. His breathing slowed, his tail stilled. Rex let out a low sound, not a bark, not a growl, something closer to a warning that hadn't decided who it was for yet. Matthew followed his gaze. At first, he saw nothing, just the pale sweep of ice and snow, the muted reeds near the edge of the lake. Then movement, small, uneven, wrong. A child stood near the water. She was thin, painfully so, bundled in an oversized coat that swallowed her frame. Her hood was up, shadowing her face, but Matthew could see enough to know she was very young. 6, maybe, 7 at most. She stood slightly sideways, weight shifting unevenly, one foot lifting and setting down again with careful slowness, as if the ground itself hurt her. Rex stood. The leash tightened before Matthew realized his hand had gripped it. The dog pulled once, gently but insistently, eyes never leaving the girl. Matthew rose from his chair. He approached slowly, boots crunching on frost-dusted wood. He stopped several feet away, lowering himself to one knee, not out of training but instinct. He kept his voice soft, the way he always did with frightened people. "Hey there," he said. "You okay?" The girl flinched. She pulled her arms deeper into her sleeves, shoulders curling inward. Her face was pale beneath smudges of dirt and cold reddened skin. Light brown hair escaped her hood in uneven strands, damp at the ends as if melted snow had found its way there. Her eyes, too large for her face, flicked past Matthew, scanning behind him, around him, anywhere but his. Rex moved closer, placing himself between Matthew and the lake, but angling his body protectively toward the child. He did not bark. He did not lunge. He simply stayed. Matthew noticed the girl's breathing. Shallow. Too fast. "What's your name?" Matthew asked. She didn't answer. "That's okay," he said quickly. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to." She swallowed, lips trembling. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely there, a thread of sound torn by the wind. "They can't find me." Matthew's chest tightened. "Who can't find you?" She shook her head hard, as if the question itself was dangerous. Her gaze dropped to the ground. "I'm not supposed to be here," she whispered. "I can't let them." Rex shifted closer to her feet. Matthew noticed then how she stood. One foot pressed flat, the other barely touching the ground. When she moved, it was careful, controlled, like someone trying not to cry out. "Does something hurt?" he asked gently. She stiffened instantly. Her foot slid back, away from him, protectively. "No." It was the fastest word she'd said. Matthew didn't push. He'd learned long ago that fear could close doors faster than force ever could. Instead, he nodded, as if he believed her. "Okay." He glanced briefly at Rex. The dog's nose hovered near the girl's ankle, not touching, just close enough to sense. Rex's posture had changed. Head low, shoulders forward, alert but calm. It was the stance he took when guarding something fragile. Matthew turned back to the girl. "I'm Matthew. I work nearby." "This is Rex. He's friendly." Rex sat on command, though Matthew hadn't spoken one aloud. The girl's eyes flicked to the dog. For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not relief exactly, but recognition. She studied Rex the way children studied animals when they didn't trust adults yet. Her breathing slowed by a fraction. "Sophie," she said at last. Matthew smiled softly. "That's a good name." The wind cut sharper then, lifting the hem of her coat. Matthew noticed how thin her shoes were, canvas, soaked, stiff with cold. The right one bulged oddly near the ankle, darker with dampness. When Sophie shifted again, her face pinched for half a second before she hit it. Matthew's instinct stirred. Not the trained ones, the older ones. The ones that remembered hiding pain because showing it made things worse. "You look cold," he said. "There's a place right over there where it's warmer. We can sit. You don't have to go anywhere you don't want to." Sophie hesitated. Rex remained still, eyes steady, body like a barrier against the world. After a moment, she nodded once. Inside the covered section of the restaurant, the air was warmer but still quiet. Matthew helped Sophie onto a bench, careful not to touch her legs. She tucked her feet beneath her, favoring one side. Rex lay down immediately in front of her, his body angled so that anyone approaching would have to go past him first. A woman behind the counter glanced over, concern flickering across her face, but Matthew gave a small shake of his head. Not yet. Matthew crouched again, closer now. "Sophie, is there someone you're supposed to be with?" Her hands twisted inside her sleeves. "I was told to wait." "Who told you?" She closed her eyes. "I don't remember." Matthew knew that answer. It wasn't confusion. It was protection. As he spoke softly, asking harmless questions, what she liked to eat, whether she'd been there long, his gaze kept drifting back to her foot. The ankle was swollen now. faintly visible beneath the fabric. The shoe looked wrong. Too tight, too stiff, as if something inside didn't belong. He reached out slowly, stopping inches away. "May I check your foot? I just want to make sure you're okay." Sophie recoiled instantly, pulling her leg back, eyes wide with panic. "Don't," she whispered. "Please, don't take it off." Matthew froze. Rex lifted his head, ears pricked, a low sound vibrating in his chest. Matthew raised his hands in surrender. "Okay," he said quickly. "I won't." Sophie's breathing slowed again, but her eyes never left his face. Matthew leaned back on his heels, heart pounding now, not with fear, but certainty. Whatever Sophie was hiding, it wasn't mischief. It wasn't imagination. It was something she had been told to protect, even if it hurt her. Rex shifted closer, his nose nearly touching the swollen shoe, as if standing guard over the secret inside. Outside, the lake creaked softly as the ice adjusted beneath the winter sun. Matthew looked at Sophie, then at Rex, and felt the quiet certainty settle in his chest. This wasn't a lost child. This was a child carrying something the world had tried to bury, and Rex knew it. Matthew stayed where he was, low and unthreatening, letting the moment stretch without filling it with words. Sophie sat curled on the bench, knees drawn close, her body angled protectively around her right foot. Each time she shifted, it was careful, deliberate, the kind of movement learned through repeated pain. Her fingers dug into the fabric of the oversized coat he had draped over her shoulders, knuckles paling whenever a sharp ache flared and then subsided. She was enduring something, not fighting it, and that distinction mattered more than Matthew could explain. Rex lay directly in front of her, broad chest pressed to the cold wooden floor, head lifted just enough to watch the room. His ears tracked every sound, every footstep, every breath that wasn't Sophie's or Matthew's. The dog's amber eyes returned again and again to the girl's swollen shoe, not with curiosity, but with intent, as if that misshapen outline were the center of gravity for everything happening here. Rex was 5 years old, in the prime of his working life, his coat thick and well kept, scars hidden beneath fur from past training exercises that had taught him the cost of hesitation. He had learned early that danger didn't always look loud. Matthew spoke softly, asking questions that didn't corner her. What kind of weather she liked, whether she was hungry, if she wanted water. Sophie answered in nods and small shakes of her head, her gaze drifting toward the window whenever voices passed outside. When a phone rang somewhere behind the counter, she startled violently, shoulders jumping, breath catching as if she had been struck. Matthew noticed how her eyes dropped instantly to the floor, how her body folded inward, making herself smaller, invisible. "I can ask them to keep it quiet," he said gently, gesturing vaguely toward the counter. She nodded quickly, relief flickering across her face before being swallowed by fear again. Matthew stood and walked toward the counter, slow and deliberate. The woman behind it was middle-aged, tall and slightly stooped, with graying blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail and hands rough from years of work. Her name tag read Sarah. Her eyes were kind but tired, the eyes of someone who had learned not to pry too hard into other people's pain. "She okay?" Sarah asked quietly. "I don't know yet," Matthew replied. "Could you lower the volume back there?" Sarah didn't ask questions. She nodded once and moved to comply, glancing back at Sophie with concern that lingered long after she turned away. When Matthew returned, Sophie's foot had shifted again, just enough for him to see how swollen the ankle had become beneath the fabric. The shoe looked waterlogged, stiff, its shape distorted in a way that had nothing to do with growth or cold alone. His instincts pressed harder now, the ones sharpened by years of responding too late to situations that had started small. "I want to make sure you're not hurt," he said carefully, keeping his voice level. "Sometimes when feet get cold or wet, they can get injured without you realizing it." Sophie shook her head hard, hair falling into her eyes. "Please," she whispered, "don't take it off." The plea wasn't defiant, it was desperate. Rex shifted closer, placing his body between Matthew's reaching hand and Sophie's foot, not aggressively but firmly, as if reinforcing her boundary. Matthew withdrew immediately. He had trained Rex not to interfere unless necessary, but he trusted the dog's judgment. Rex wasn't blocking him, he was protecting Sophie's choice. At that moment, the door opened, letting in a rush of cold air and a woman with a notebook tucked under her arm. She was in her early 30s, average height, with dark hair cut to her shoulders and skin browned slightly by years of outdoor reporting. Her coat was practical rather than stylish, boots scuffed, eyes alert. This was Emily Ross, a local journalist known for persistence more than popularity. She noticed details other people overlooked, and that habit had cost her more than one friendship. Emily slowed when she saw the scene. A uniformed officer kneeling, a child hunched protectively, a police dog standing guard like a silent wall. Her gaze went first to Sophie's foot. She didn't approach right away. She ordered a coffee, gave the room time to accept her presence, then drifted closer under the pretense of looking out the window. Her eyes kept returning to the girl's uneven posture, the way her shoulders tightened whenever someone passed too close. Emily had grown up with a brother who limped for months because he'd been told not to complain. She recognized that kind of stillness. Matthew noticed her attention and met her eyes briefly. It wasn't a warning, it was an acknowledgement. "Is she lost?" Emily asked quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. "We're figuring that out," Matthew replied. Sophie looked at Emily, then quickly away, pulling her coat tighter. Rex's ears flicked, but he didn't move. He had assessed Emily already. Curious. Alert. Not a threat. Emily knelt slightly, not too close, her voice calm. "I'm Emily. I write stories. You don't have to talk to me." Sophie didn't answer, but her breathing didn't quicken this time. That alone was something. Matthew felt the room narrowing, all paths pointing back to the same unanswered question. Whatever was inside that shoe mattered. Not just physically, but emotionally. Sophie was guarding it the way children guarded promises they didn't fully understand. "I won't force anything," Matthew said softly, more to himself than anyone else. "But we can't ignore that she's in pain." Sophie's eyes filled, tears threatening but never quite falling. "If I take it off," she whispered, "I won't be safe." The words landed heavy. Rex pressed his chin gently against the floor, still blocking her foot, a quiet sentinel. Matthew straightened slightly, his mind already racing ahead, measuring options, risks, time. He knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever Sophie was protecting, it had taught her that pain was safer than being found, and that meant this wasn't over. It was only beginning. Emily Ross began her work quietly, the way she always did when the truth felt fragile. She did not announce herself as a journalist, did not pull out her recorder or camera. Instead, she walked the perimeter of the lakeside as if she were simply another passerby, boots crunching softly over frost, eyes absorbing details others dismissed as background. Emily had a narrow face, framed by dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, and eyes that rarely stopped moving. Years covering small-town stories had taught her that the most important clues rarely sat at the center of attention. They waited at the edges. She started with the security cameras. The outdoor restaurant had two, old models mounted under the eaves, their lenses fogged at the corners. Sarah, the restaurant worker, unlocked the small back office without protest. Sarah moved slowly, her tall, slender frame slightly bent forward, hands clasped, as if she had learned long ago to make herself unobtrusive. She watched Emily with quiet curiosity, but did not hover. The footage was grainy, time-stamped, and unremarkable at first. Empty tables, wind-blown napkins, a pair of joggers one morning. Then Emily paused the playback. There, a small figure near the lake. Sophie. She appeared briefly on the screen 3 days earlier, standing in almost the exact spot where Matthew had found her. She stood for a long time, unmoving, then walked away with a subtle limp that grew more pronounced the longer she stayed on her feet. The next clip showed her again, earlier that same day, and then again the day before that. Always alone, always waiting, never entering the restaurant, never approaching anyone. Emily felt a slow chill settle into her stomach. This wasn't wandering. This was returning. She thanked Sarah and stepped back outside, dialing notes into her phone. The pattern was clear. Sophie had been nearby for days, possibly longer, choosing the same stretch of shoreline as if it meant something to her. Across the parking area, Matthew crouched near Rex, fastening a longer lead. Rex's posture had changed since the previous hour. He was alert now, energized, nose already sweeping low across the frozen ground. The German shepherd moved with deliberate precision, his broad shoulders rolling smoothly beneath his thick coat, breath puffing in steady clouds. To an untrained eye, he might have seemed restless. Matthew knew better. Rex had found a thread. The scent trail led away from the lake, past a stand of bare trees, and toward the wooded edge beyond the restaurant. The snow was deeper here, untouched except for faint disturbances where wind had reshaped old footprints into ghosts. Rex slowed, nose pressed close to the ground, tail lifting slightly as his focus sharpened. He stopped, circled once, then pulled forward again with renewed insistence. Matthew followed, careful not to disturb what little evidence remained. With every step, his unease grew. Children did not wander into woods like this by accident. Not in winter, not alone. They found the car, half buried beneath a drift, its rear end visible like a broken bone through skin. It was an older sedan, paint dulled by years of neglect, windows fogged from the inside. Snow had gathered thickly around the tires, indicating it hadn't moved in days, maybe weeks. Matthew approached slowly, hand resting near his radio. Rex stiffened, ears forward, a low warning sound vibrating in his chest. Inside the car, the smell hit first. Burnt fabric. Matthew opened the door and leaned back as cold air rushed in. The back seat was littered with the remains of children's clothing, small socks, a shirt, the edge of a jacket, charred and blackened, as if someone had tried, hastily and incompletely, to destroy them. The floor was muddy, scuffed with hurried footprints. In the front seat lay a crumpled fast food bag and an empty bottle of water. No toys, no bags, no personal items meant to stay. Emily arrived moments later, breath sharp in her lungs as she took in the scene. Her eyes darkened, jaw tightening. She didn't speak right away. She had seen neglect before, abuse too, but this was erasure. They wanted her gone, she said quietly. Not lost. Gone. Matthew nodded. He crouched, examining the ground around the vehicle. There were smaller prints here, half filled with snow, uneven in depth. A child favoring one foot. Sophie. His thoughts returned instantly to the swollen shoe, to her panic at the idea of removing it, to the way Rex had guarded her foot like a vault. The realization came slowly, heavy and undeniable. She hadn't just been left behind. She had been instructed. Emily followed his gaze. "She was told to keep something," she said, voice low. "Wasn't she?" Matthew didn't answer. He didn't need to. Back at the restaurant, Sophie sat exactly where they had left her, Rex still stationed at her feet like a sentry. Her face lifted when Matthew entered, relief flickering briefly before she noticed the tension in his shoulders. She tucked her foot back instinctively, pressing it beneath the bench. Matthew knelt again, closer this time but still careful. "Sophie," he said gently, "I went to look around where you've been staying." Her eyes widened. "Did you find it?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Matthew's heart clenched. "Find what?" She froze, realizing her mistake. Her gaze dropped, lips pressed tight together. Tears pooled, but did not fall. Rex leaned back slightly, body still between her and the world, but his head turned toward Matthew now, as if acknowledging the shared understanding. Emily watched from a distance, her reporter's instincts quieted by something more human. Sophie wasn't hiding an object out of defiance. She was protecting a promise, one that hurt her with every step. Matthew straightened slowly, choosing his words with care. "Whatever it is," he said, "you don't have to protect it alone anymore." Sophie shook her head once, very small. "I have to," she whispered. "It's the only way." Outside, wind swept across the lake, erasing faint marks in the snow as if time itself were conspiring to bury the truth. But Matthew knew better now. The snow had hidden many things. It had not hidden everything. The paper trail unraveled slowly, the way uncomfortable truths often do. Emily Ross worked late into the evening at a corner table of the closed restaurant, laptop open, scarf still wrapped around her neck. The glow of the screen sharpened the angles of her face, revealing the faint lines earned from years of chasing stories that resisted daylight. She cross-checked short-term rental records, utility hookups, and forwarding addresses, finding names that didn't quite belong to themselves, initials instead of first names, payments routed through prepaid cards, leases that began and ended in the middle of weeks. Each address was close enough to move quickly, far enough to disappear without questions. A pattern emerged, and it wasn't random. Someone had been careful. Someone had planned to be temporary. Matthew watched from a distance, Rex at his side, the dog's head resting on his paws but eyes alert. Matthew's face had settled into the quiet concentration that colleagues recognized as the moment he stopped hoping for easy answers. He'd been this way since a call early in his career, a welfare check that came too late, had taught him how neatly adults could tidy their exits. He kept his beard trimmed short, his hair clipped close, a preference born not of vanity but practicality. He disliked anything that could be pulled, anything that gave a grip. With people, he was patient. With lies, he was not. Emily cleared her throat. "There's something else," she said. "An old probate dispute. Closed 8 years ago. The child's estate, small but contested. It vanished from the docket without explanation." Matthew's jaw tightened. "Vanished how?" "Withdrawn," Emily replied. "On paper. No hearing, no appeal. The guardian at the time signed, then disappeared from the record." Matthew thought of Sophie's words, the way she'd guarded them as carefully as her foot. "Adults who don't want to be found," he said quietly. Sophie sat nearby on the bench, Rex still stationed like a living gate at her feet. She had grown accustomed to the dog's presence now, fingers occasionally brushing the thick fur at his neck. When she spoke, it was to him, not the adults. She whispered to Rex as if he were an old friend, telling him things she could not organize into sentences for anyone else. Her voice came in fragments, images rather than explanations. A car moving fast at night, headlights slicing through snow, cold water seeping into her shoe. A voice she could not place anymore, repeating the same instruction until it replaced all other thoughts. Don't let it fall out. Matthew listened without interrupting, careful not to translate her memories into conclusions too soon. He noticed the way she shifted when she talked, protecting her foot, the swelling more pronounced now. He knew enough about injuries to recognize the difference between cold and pressure, between exposure and something pressing where it shouldn't. The pain wasn't accidental, it was sustained. A man arrived just before dusk, summoned by Emily's calls. He introduced himself as Daniel Price, a county records clerk in his late 40s, tall and narrow-shouldered, with wire-rim glasses that slid down a nose permanently reddened by winter air. His hair had thinned at the crown, and he spoke with the careful diction of someone used to documents outlasting people. Years earlier, a house fire had taken his family's photographs. Since then, he treated records with a reverence bordering on guilt. The file was sealed, Daniel said, opening a worn folder. Not standard. Someone requested an expedited closure citing the child's relocation. No forwarding jurisdiction listed. Emily leaned forward. That's not how it's done. Daniel nodded. It wasn't done how it's done. Matthew glanced at Sophie. Her eyes were fixed on Daniel's hands, on the folder, on the possibility that paper could explain pain. She hugged her coat tighter, foot tucked beneath her, as if the secret itself weighed more than her small frame. As evening settled, Sophie's words returned in sharper pieces. She described the water inside her shoe, how it grew heavier with every step, how she learned to keep her foot tilted so it wouldn't shift. She told Rex about the promise she'd been made to repeat, not knowing whether it was hers or someone else's. Matthew understood then with unsettling clarity. The object hadn't just been hidden. It had been chosen for the place it would hurt the most, where it could not be forgotten. Emily closed her laptop. The dispute involved a relative, she said carefully. A woman, not a parent. She challenged custody and lost, or was made to lose. Sophie looked up at that, not with recognition, but with something like gravity.
She said it would open, Sophie whispered to Rex, if I kept it safe.
Matthew's breath slowed.
Open what? He asked gently.
Sophie shook her head, fear rising.
I don't know. Just home.
The word landed between them, fragile and incomplete. Matthew straightened, feeling the edges of the truth press closer. Someone had reduced a child to a courier, a key ring without a ring, a promise without protection. The names were still missing, the door still closed, but the shape of the lock was becoming clear. Outside, the wind shifted, erasing the last of the day's tracks. Rex lifted his head, ears forward, sensing movement beyond the glass. Matthew followed his gaze and knew the next step would not be quiet. Not anymore. The swelling could no longer be ignored. By morning, Sophie's ankle had ballooned enough to change the color of her skin, a dull, angry red that crept upward despite the warmth of the room. Matthew had watched it worsen through the night, counting breaths, measuring time the way officers did when they feared the next step would hurt someone they were trying to protect. When the clinic finally opened, he made the call he had been postponing, not because he doubted the need, but because he understood what removing that shoe would take from Sophie before it could give anything back. Dr. Helen Moore arrived with a canvas medical bag and a presence that softened rooms. She was in her early 50s, average height, shoulders squared by years of steady work, hair streaked silver and pulled into a low bun. Her face bore the calm of someone who had learned how to carry other people's fear without letting it spill. She spoke gently, but not in the sing-song way that children often distrusted. She knelt to Sophie's level, palms open, eyes warm. "I need to see what's hurting you," she said. "I won't do anything without telling you first." Sophie pressed back against the bench, tears welling, gaze darting to Rex. The German shepherd rose and placed his body between her and the doctor, not aggressively, but with a firm certainty that stopped the room. Rex was calm, coat gleaming even in the dim light, breath steady. Matthew placed a hand on his collar, grounding them both. "It's okay," he murmured. Rex held, then yielded half a step, eyes never leaving Sophie's foot. Dr. Moore noticed the way Sophie's hands shook, the way her shoulders tightened as if bracing for impact. "We'll go slow," she said. "You're in control." Matthew knelt beside Sophie, close enough to be present, far enough not to crowd. "I'm here," he said. "Rex is here. No one's taking anything away without you." Sophie swallowed hard. "If it falls," she whispered, voice breaking, "I won't have a place." Dr. Moore's gaze flicked to Matthew, a question without words. He nodded once. The decision had already been made. The truth had simply caught up to it. They worked together, carefully. Dr. Moore loosened the laces while Matthew kept his hands visible, slow, predictable. Sophie cried quietly, a sound like a leak rather than a storm. When the shoe finally slid free, the room seemed to inhale. The lining was torn. Hidden beneath the shredded fabric, pressed flat against the sole where every step had driven it deeper, lay a key-old, rusted, its edges sharp enough to cut. It was crusted with frozen mud and flecked with dried blood. The imprint of it was visible on Sophie's skin, an angry crescent carved by days of pressure and obedience. Sophie broke then, sobs tearing out of her chest. "They said if I dropped it," she cried, "there'd be nowhere to go. They said it was the only door." Matthew felt something in him crack and steady at the same time. He had seen children endure pain. He had not often seen them choose it. He took the key gently, wrapping it in gauze as Dr. Moore cleaned Sophie's foot, the red easing to a livid pink under careful hands. Rex lowered his head and pressed it against Sophie's knee, a quiet anchor. Dr. Moore finished and stepped back, eyes shining. "You did the hardest thing," she said softly. "You don't have to do it anymore." Emily arrived just as the room settled, breath fogging the glass. She took in the gauze-wrapped key, Sophie's bandaged foot, Matthew's rigid stillness. She didn't ask for permission before understanding. "Where does it lead?" she asked. The answer came from the records, not from Sophie. Daniel Price returned with a location he had been chasing all morning, his thin fingers tapping a map. "There's a property," he said, voice careful. "A cabin, deeded years ago, recently dormant, near another lake." Matthew pictured it instantly. Wood weathered by winters, a door kept closed by neglect and intent. He weighed the key in his hand and understood its true cost. It wasn't just metal. It was a promise imposed on a child who had been told pain was safer than being found. Sophie watched him, fear still flickering, but something else rising beneath it. "Does it open?" she asked. Matthew met her eyes. "It will," he said, "but not today. Today, you rest." Rex settled at her feet, vigilance easing into warmth. Outside, the lake creaked as ice shifted under the sun, a sound like a held breath finally released. The shock wasn't the key itself, it was what it proved. That Sophie had carried her own way home, pressed into her skin, because adults had decided it was easier than protecting her. The door would be opened, and this time, Sophie would walk through without pain. The cabin sat back from the road as if it had chosen obscurity over neglect. Pine needles layered thick on the roof, windows dulled by winters that had passed without witnesses. Emily Ross parked at a respectful distance and walked the rest of the way, boots sinking into old snow. The door yielded with a tired groan. Inside, the air smelled of dust and sap, the quiet holding a weight that felt deliberate. Emily moved carefully, photographing what she found without rearranging it. A small table held folders browned at the edges, their tabs labeled in an unsteady hand. On the wall, photographs had been tacked and then torn away, leaving pale silhouettes where faces used to be. One remained intact. Sophie stood beside a young woman, both turned slightly toward each other, as if sharing a private thought. The woman's hair was dark and loosely tied, her posture protective, a hand hovering near Sophie's shoulder without touching. Worry lived openly in her eyes. Emily recognized the look. It was the expression of someone who had been trying to keep a promise with too little power. Records led her next to a town 2 counties over, to a modest duplex where the woman from the photograph lived now under a different last name. Her name was Claire Whitman. Claire was in her early 30s, slim, with olive-toned skin and hair she cut herself to save money. She dressed plainly, favored sweaters with sleeves pushed up, and carried herself with a quiet resolve shaped by losing a fight she believed she should have won. When Emily knocked, Claire opened the door, already bracing for disappointment. Emily introduced herself simply and showed the photograph. Claire's breath left her in a rush. She steadied herself against the doorframe, fingers whitening. "She's alive," Claire said, not asking. The certainty was a tremor. "I think she is," Emily replied. "And she's safe, for now." Claire closed her eyes. "They told me she drowned," she said. "They said there was nothing to recover." The words fell without drama, heavy because they had been carried so long. Back at the clinic, Matthew weighed the clock the way he always did when systems moved slower than children. Paperwork stacked, calls went unanswered. A temporary placement loomed if verification took too long. Sophie rested with her foot elevated, bandaged, Rex curled nearby like a living guardrail. Matthew had filed the emergency report, but the law had its own tempo, and it did not hurry for compassion. A knock interrupted the quiet. A man stood in the doorway, mid-40s, broad-shouldered, beard peppered with gray, eyes that scanned before settling. He wore a jacket too clean for the weather. He smiled without warmth. "I'm here about the child," he said. "Social services." Rex rose instantly, placing himself between the man and Sophie, posture rigid, teeth still hidden. Matthew felt the room tilt. "Badge," he said. The man hesitated a fraction too long. "I don't have it on me." "Then you can leave," Matthew replied, voice calm, final. The man took a step anyway. Rex lunged, not to bite, but to block, a wall of muscle and warning. The man backed off, hands raised, smile gone. He retreated quickly, the door shutting harder than necessary. Matthew's pulse slowed only when the lock clicked. He knew then the key had done more than point to a door. It had attracted attention. People who wanted Sophie unseen still believed they had time. Emily returned with Claire an hour later. Claire stood small in the room, eyes fixed on Sophie as if afraid she might vanish again. Sophie watched her carefully, head tilted. Recognition did not come as a rush, it came as alignment. Claire knelt, keeping distance. "You don't have to remember me," she said softly. "I just wanted to see you." Sophie studied her face, then Rex's, then Matthew's. "You're the one who said home," Sophie whispered, uncertain. Claire's eyes filled. "I tried to be." The truth moved quietly then, settling into place without speeches. Emily provided the documents. Matthew coordinated the verification. The system bent, not because it was kind, but because there was finally proof. The danger hadn't vanished, but it had retreated. That night, the cabin's door stayed closed. The right door would open later. For now, Sophie slept without guarding her foot, Rex's steady breathing a metronome beside her. Matthew sat nearby, listening to the ordinary sounds of safety. The truth wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It had arrived. The lake looked different in late winter. Not warmer yet, but willing. Sunlight skimmed the surface, loosening the tight white skin that had held for months. Along the shore, the ice sighed and shifted, a sound like a long apology. Matthew stood back from the water with Rex at his side, leash slack, posture finally relaxed. He had finished the last report at dawn, accepting the scrutiny that came with choosing a child over convenience. It was a risk he understood. It was one he would take again. Sophie arrived bundled and steady, her steps careful but no longer guarded. The bandage was gone now, replaced by a soft wrap and a shoe that fit without secrets. She walked to the edge where she had once stood in pain and silence, then stopped, testing the ground, trusting it. Rex watched her with an alert gentleness, ears easing, tail still. At 5 years old, the German Shepherd's coat had begun to lighten around the muzzle, a quiet mark of service, his amber eyes less sharp now, more warm. He lay down in the sun as if this were what all the training had been for. Claire Whitman stood a few paces away, hands folded, giving Sophie space. In daylight, Claire's features softened. Her dark hair caught copper in the sun, her olive skin warmed, the tension in her shoulders finally releasing. She was slim, not fragile, a woman shaped by perseverance rather than force. Losing the fight for custody years ago had taught her patience she never wanted to learn. She waited now without asking, letting Sophie decide the distance. Sophie looked back at her, then at Matthew, then at Rex. She took a breath that did not hitch. "You said home," she told Claire, not accusing, not pleading, just remembering. Claire nodded once. "I did." Sophie stepped forward and took her hand. The recognition came not as a rush of memory, but as relief. No weight pressing into her step, no rule to repeat. Claire's hand was warm, steady, empty. That was enough. Emily Ross stood apart, notebook closed, camera down. The lines at the corners of her eyes deepened as she watched, not from distance, but from respect. She had written the piece already in her head, paired of spectacle, anchored to facts that would stand. She would name no villains the law could not hold, but she would not soften the truth. Kindness, she had learned, traveled farther when it did not shout. Behind them, the restaurant reopened its doors for the season. Sarah set chairs upright, her tall frame moving with practiced ease, gray blonde hair catching light as she glanced toward the lake. She smiled and went back to work, content to have been a small part of something finished well. Matthew approached Sophie and knelt, the habit returning without need. "You did great," he said. "You don't have to be brave today." Sophie considered that, then smiled. It was small, but it stayed. "I can walk," she said, and did across the wooden boards, across the place where waiting had once lived. Each step landed clean. Rex rolled onto his side and stretched, a long exhale leaving him. Matthew unclipped the leash and let it hang loose in his hand. He looked at the lake again, the thin sheets drifting apart, and felt the quiet settle where urgency had been. The system would keep turning. Questions would come. He had documented everything, signed what needed signing, accepted the consequences that followed choosing right over easy. It was enough. Claire squeezed Sophie's hand. "We'll go slow," she said. "We'll make it gentle." Emily watched them walk together, then turned toward Matthew. "I'll let the story breathe," she said. "People will find it." Matthew nodded. "That's all it needs." As the sun climbed, the ice gave way, piece by piece, water darkening where white had been. Sophie paused once more to look back. Rex lifted his head. Matthew met her eyes and gave a small nod. Between winter and spring, something ordinary happened. A child walked without pain. A door closed on a secret. Another opened on a future that did not require endurance. The cold receded, the ice melted, and what remained was warmth earned, kept, shared. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or fire. Sometimes they come quietly, through a stranger who stops when others walk past, through a dog that listens to fear before words are spoken, through a child who survives not because life was kind, but because God placed the right hearts in her path at the right moment. Sophie did not know the word miracle. She only knew pain, cold, and a promise she was told never to drop. Yet even in that suffering, God was working, guiding footsteps to a frozen lake, softening a man's heart to listen, and using compassion to open a door no key alone ever could. In our own lives, we may carry hidden pain too. We may walk carefully, quietly, believing no one sees what hurts us most. But this story reminds us God sees, God remembers, and God sends help, often through ordinary people who choose love over comfort. If this story touched your heart, please share it so others may feel hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read every one. And if you believe, take a moment to say a prayer for the children, the lonely, and the unseen. Please subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us faith still lives, kindness still matters, and even in the coldest seasons, God can make the ice melt. May God bless you, protect you, and keep your heart warm. Amen.